Hi, I'm Amie Devero, and hopefully by now you've had some kind of introduction to who I am and what I'm going to talk about. So each and every one of us in an organization has some particular value that we're meant to contribute to the organization. For example, if you're an engineer, then you contribute a working code that's been debugged that could do what the platform is meant to do. And the way that that work gets done is through thinking and actual typing and coding, and it requires a great deal of deep work. Now, that's true for many, many people in an organization. In fact, there are very few people who have consequential roles in an organization that don't require deep, focused work in order to produce whatever the value is that they're engaged to work. So we're going to talk about how you can, in an organization, begin to corral your time so that you can actually do the deep focused work that's necessary to succeed in producing the value that you want to produce in your organization. Now, let me see if I can share my screen. Hang on. I'm dropping my glasses and my cat is trying to join us. Okay. Now, the problem that most of us have is this battle between the number of meetings that we have and getting into a state of flow. I mean, really, our primary mission is to corral the time to produce the value we need to produce. That value may be producing code, and that value may be writing content, or that value may be developing a UI, or it may be doing strategy sessions with clients. But all of that is deep focused work. Now, the problem is that for any of us to begin to do that work, we need to get into a state of flow. Now, this was defined about 25 years ago by an author whose name I can't pronounce, but it is a book called Flow. By now, it's in the sort of general culture, and we all know what it is. It's that moment when you get into a groove, when you're so engaged in what you're doing that the world outside disappears. We don't have that very often in our world today, because along with all the things pressing on your mind that you feel you need to do, we also have tons of alerts and demands on us. You may have Slack open and your email may be pinging you, your text may be going on. You may also have other windows open on your browser that are demanding your attention. So getting into a state of flow already without even adding any other people into the mix is challenging. And yet, that is the state of mind necessary for us to generate the value for which we are employed. So there's a constant battle to get into a state of flow. And each and every one of us has a different rate at which that happens. So there are people for whom it takes about 15 minutes to get into a state of flow. I have some CEO clients like that. They can switch, it seems like, at the bat of an eye. There are other people, I have some CTO clients who are like this, for whom it can take up to 45 minutes to clear their mind of all the other pressing demands and actually shed those distractions so that they can totally focus on the work at hand. You can see that's a massive disparity. And if what you need is 45 minutes to get into the groove and do your work, then you need to block the time that has the 45 minutes on the front end and perhaps the 45 minutes on the back end, which means that a 2-hour time block for you to do some portion of work may need as much as 3 hours blocked in your calendar. Excuse me. And that is really hard to get when you have all these other things going on. So the very first thing that all of us need to do is to figure out our own individual TTF. That is our own individual time to flow. Now, for me, I know it's around 25 minutes. And most of the time, I'm able to sort of have my calendar include that buffer. For example, I don't schedule client sessions back to back. I leave at least 45 minutes between them because For me to be fully present with a client, including being sort of aware of all of the background information that I have and all of the context that makes it possible for me to be effective, takes time. And if I go from one client to the next, which often means from one organization to the next, from one type of business to the next, I don't have time to do the switching that allows me to be fully present for client number two. I need about 25 minutes, and you may need less or you may need more, but understanding and feeling confident in knowing what your TTF is critical to ensuring that your time blocks give you the necessary time to do the work you need to do. Now, this may stun you. I know you probably never thought this before, right? No, I'm kidding. Obviously, you probably think this is the most enormous non sequitur ever, but we don't operate like this is true. The reality is that nothing happens outside of time. You don't write an email in an instant. You don't have a conversation that takes a minute. Nothing happens that way. And yet, we conduct our lives as though there were these things that happen instantaneously, no time duration whatsoever. How often is it that somebody says to you, hey, I just need to talk to you about this for a second? Have you ever talked to anybody about anything for a second? I do this thing where I say to my clients, look, one of my core values is generosity. So feel free to text me in between sessions if you need to have like a quick conversation. And I will have that happen. So a client will text me and say, oh my gosh, Amie, I really need to talk to you about something. It'll only take 10 minutes. It will not only take 10 minutes. When that happens, I have to look at my calendar and ensure that I have about 35 minutes available in order for that conversation to be any kind of productive, right? So I get on the phone, and by the time the client has given me enough context and background to understand what they're concerned about, and I've listened to where they're coming from and I've responded, 25 minutes has gone by. That's just reality. So nothing happens outside of time. That means that every single meeting that's on your calendar is taking away time. This is all about a sum, right? There's only as much time as there is. And if nothing happens outside of time, then each individual thing that takes a duration is taking that time out of your time pie, right? So you need to keep this mantra in your brain. Nothing happens outside of time. Now, let's look at a calendar. This was actually a day that I had on February 15th, where I was spending the day sort of auditing a client's activities. And so most of the day, I would call it just sort of trailing them, right? But that means I have to attend every single thing on their calendar. So we had a weekly sales meeting that was at 8:30 in the morning. And then I had a call with another client that I had to perform. And you can see there is inadequate time there. In fact, they overlap. So I had to leave the sales meeting and go do this call. Then my client had a one-on-one, which I come into late. So these aren't even giving me a buffer between, they're not even back to back. Now, finally, there's a 30-minute break before I go and attend the product meeting for the UI. And then I have to go to a different client for a noon conversation about their strategy and getting into another vertical. And it goes on and on and on and on. Now, on this calendar, every single thing is some kind of meeting. And I don't know about you, but I'm an introvert, which means that conversations and meetings are exhausting for me. And the only thing on this entire day that has deep work, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go that way, is this thing right here, do sales strategy. And it happens after all these meetings, which are completely exhausting. And it doesn't have any more than a 30-minute buffer, which is just about enough to go to the bathroom and get a cup of tea. So I haven't accounted in this day for my TTF, my time to flow. And I've also done a very stupid tactical thing, which is to put my deep work at a time of day when I have the least amount of energy. And we do this kind of thing all the time. So what's the answer to this kind of chaos? Well, one thing we can do is build a TTF moat. I know that sounds really silly. A TTF moat is the buffer that goes around every single session of deep work that gives you the time to get into that state of flow. And if your TTF is 25 minutes, which is about mine, then you need to account for that as you build a time block. And if your time is 45 minutes, you need to account for that, which means that if you're an engineer and your time to flow is 45 minutes, this is a real client I have in mind, and you need 3 hours to actually get some portion of a new feature done, you need to book 4 hours, because that first hour is 45 minutes of getting into the groove and doing the work. So that's really tough, and that requires you to look at your calendar a little bit differently. Instead of booking things like this, where you have 30 minutes between a meeting and a deep work session, this meeting should have been booked at 6 o'clock. So there's a full hour with the 25 minutes to get into my state of flow. And then I really need another hour on the other end, because by the time I sit down, get into a state of flow, and in my group start working on this, I will have used up an hour and a half at least, because no real productive work typically gets done in just an hour, unless you're one of those people who can context shift and get into a state of flow, clear your mind of all the other stuff going on, and actually do the work. This is not easy to do. So what is the problem with our work that happens? Well, one of the really big problems is that we have shared calendars. So many organizations have shared calendars. And you know what that allows for? That allows people to put meetings on your calendar, whether you want them there or not. How in the world are you meant to make your time valuable if people are constantly sticking meetings wherever they want? And in order to really address this, we need to dig in a little bit to what these meetings are. So let's talk a little bit about what these meetings are and where in the world they come from, because meetings don't come out of nowhere. There are set topics, set subjects, and let's say missions for each and every meeting. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some idiosyncratic meetings, ad hoc meetings that take place in your organization, and those need to happen. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about all the meetings that happen in almost every organization, almost every single week. I mean, there are tons of them. So let's start. If you're in a technology company, at the very least, you have a daily stand-up. That's a meeting to go over what the exact work is that everybody's going to do that day, and sometimes to share knowledge every day. So that's 30 minutes at the beginning of every single day for every single engineer on a team. Then most managers have one-on-ones with all of their direct reports every week. And then there are weekly team check-ins. That's where everybody gets together and you just go over what you're doing. So far we have like 2 weekly meetings that happen every week. We have project team meetings, so where all the folks on a project get together and review the project plan and find out who's at what milestone and who's lagging and who's ahead, etc. We have leadership team meetings every week, where all of the leaders in the organization get together to talk about how their teams are doing, whether they're advancing on accomplishing the strategy, and so forth. We have sales team meetings. This is one I'm going to talk about in some depth. Every week, most sales teams have a meeting, and that's another thing. Then we have compliance training meetings. And then you have your personal things you need to do, like go to the doctor. Maybe you need to take your kid to the doctor. Maybe you need to attend a PTA meeting. Those also take time, and that means they cost time away from your deep work. If you're in sales, you're doing prospecting appointments or you're doing pitches with clients. So each of these is a meeting, and they're all happening all the time. Now, let's talk about the sales meeting phenomenon. So the sales meeting phenomenon, I'm very familiar with. I ran a couple of companies and I ran a lot of sales teams. And there is a kind of standard practice that in an organization with a sales team, you have a sales meeting every week. I don't care if it's a car dealership or a multinational corporation or a startup or a dating service. It doesn't matter what it is. They have a sales meeting every single week. And what do you do in a sales meeting? So in a sales meeting, the sales leader, whether that's a VP of revenue or a CEO or whatever, that leader goes around the table, let's say the proverbial table, because nowadays we're all on Zoom or Google Meets or something, and they ask each individual salesperson about their progress on each individual prospect. And so the conversation goes something like, how's company X doing? And then the salesperson says, well, I sent them an email last week. They haven't responded yet. They had a bunch of questions and I sent them all of the answers. And so I don't really know where it is. It's kind of stalled. And then they ask that question for every single prospect. And you can imagine that 60 to 70% of the answers are kind of the same. I emailed and nobody emailed back. I called, I haven't gotten a call back yet. I had a conversation and they're taking it up the ladder. Like every conversation's like this, right? And half the people on the sales team are literally just reporting. And at the same time, they're doing work on their computer because they have other work to do. And this sales meeting is not providing value to them. So this is something where I would like you to actually assess value creation, because we can look at a meeting and ask the question, what is the value that this meeting produces? Now, I'm not saying that sales meeting produces no value, and there are individuals for whom it produces a great deal of value because they need coaching, they need help, they have questions. There are other people in the meeting for whom the value produced is truly nominal. There's a little bit of value from watching other people get coached if you're on a sales team, but is it a greater amount of value than you might be able to create if you were doing some kind of other work? And that's the calculus that we need to make. Is any given meeting producing more value than what I or other members of my organization would be doing were they not in that meeting? So for example, if a meeting is a check-in meeting to review every single prospect, you have to ask, is that meeting producing more value than having these half of the sales team who don't need coaching on the phone actually pursuing their leads and closing deals? Now, here's the irony about sales team meetings, and this applies to other things too. This is also true of daily stand-ups and also true of engineering team meetings. There is a technology platform in sales called a CRM, and everybody knows what it is, right? It's Salesforce or it's Pipeline. It's a technology platform that has the answer to every single question that gets asked in a sales meeting. And sorry about that, before a sales leader starts any meeting, he or she has pulled that report, and that report has all that information in it. It says how every prospect is doing, what the last action taken was, what the salesperson is waiting for. It even has notes on the last conversation. It has a probability of that deal closing, and it has a place where that deal is in the pipeline that has been defined by stages leading from cold lead all the way up to contract signed. The sales leader has that in advance of the meeting. So what is the purpose of the meeting? The meeting is now a review of the report that the sales leader already has. Ask yourself, in what way is that value greater than the value of at least the half of the sales team that doesn't need help actually doing work? And I submit that that value is disproportionate, that it is a cost. It is an opportunity cost to have the meeting rather than to have the people working. Now, how could you actually address that? In the sales meeting, you could do it asynchronously. The sales leader could pull that report and then send out a blast email with the report attached that says, this is how we're doing. These deals seem to be stopped. Is there anybody on the team that needs help or coaching? And then that that number of questions, requests for coaching, expressions of being stuck could be distributed and responded to by people asynchronously. That buys back the time for deep work, eliminates the need for everybody to attend a meeting. And by the way, sometimes people are in different time zones, so you can be stealing really prime time from people for this meeting. If you're having the meeting at 8 in the morning on the East Coast, but in Europe it's now 3 in the afternoon, that's prime time to chase down leads. That calculus gives us an idea of which meetings should happen and which meetings should not. So how can you address that in real time? These are the standard meetings. But if you were to come up with, let's call it a heuristic to decide when to have a meeting and when not, I think it might look something like this. What is the question that we're answering? If every meeting were designed to answer a specific question, then the meeting would be dictated by that question. You would eliminate check-in meetings that have no question to answer. You would eliminate sales meetings that are basically check-in meetings that have no question to answer, etc. If you contextualize your meeting decision, your meeting scheduling by what question do we have to answer, you begin to be able to triage the meetings and decide which are essential and which are not. And then you can do that same kind of analysis of what could we do instead of a meeting for every one of them. I'm not saying you'll have no meetings, but you'll have fewer meetings and you'll have meetings that are more consequential. And you may be able to buy back giant blocks of time to get into your state of flow. So what does that look like? Well, if there's not a question to answer, don't have a meeting. Is it a checklist? Then you can do it asynchronously. Doing things asynchronously is an incredible, incredible tool, because what it does is it allows individuals to address things when they have gaps in their calendar. So each individual can build their calendar, allotting the time they need for deep work, and then attend to asynchronous requests in between time. So for example, I might book in my calendar from 2 to 3 to deal with asynchronous requests, because 2 to 3 is kind of a lag in energy for me. And I know that that's a good time for me to address these questions, concerns, requests for quick conversations or whatever. Then I'm not doing deep work and I'm not actually sort of grabbing or cannibalizing my time for deep work by all these little fragmented activities that are not producing the same value. They're not unimportant, they're not unnecessary, but they may be unnecessary in the form in which they currently exist. One-on-ones, one-on-ones are really important. Most organizations have their leaders and managers do one-on-ones on a regular basis with their direct reports. And if you have a sort of robust HR department, you may also have performance reviews and 360s and one-on-ones that are dictated to help the direct reports develop themselves, help to build their leadership capacity or their excellence in doing their particular functional job. One-on-ones matter. But the cadence of one-on-ones, having them weekly, may be overkill. Why? Because if you're working with a direct report on developing some new capacity, getting greater competency in some area, the increment of improvement will not happen in 1 week. For any of us to get measurable improvement in any kind of qualitative area of our work will take at least 30 days. So why not have one-on-ones once a month? And then instead of the kind of check-in rote quality that one-on-ones take on by being weekly, you could have a weekly team meeting in which you essentially do the same process, but you basically have the cultivation of a 360 attitude so that each individual is helping the other and it's consolidated into one meeting. That means that 360s become less of a surprise because you're getting the feedback on a regular basis and you're able to adjust your behavior to optimize your performance and get along in the most productive way with your peers. Meetings outside your function. Now, this happens all the time. People from one area get asked to attend a meeting of another team, and their role is kind of like, you know how in an operating theater, there's always, at least in the movies, I don't know if this is real. In fact, in my surgeries, I don't think there was any of this, but in movies, there's always an operating theater and then this gallery above where people are watching. These meetings are kind of like that. Like the sales meeting of the sales team has a meeting to talk about one particular prospect, and they want the chief engineer there to hear what the prospect wants. Now, why? The chief engineer is going to contribute almost nothing. So this is basically, he or she is invited to be an audience to the meeting. That could happen on tape, well, proverbial tape, on digital tape. You could record those meetings and he or she could watch them later at a time between her deep work blocks of time. The other thing you can do is you can designate days for all your meetings. What if Tuesday were meeting day? I have an engineer who did that for his team. Tuesday's meeting day, he has no expectation of doing any deep work, and all of the regular meetings happen on that day. And by spreading that throughout the organization, that gives everybody back tremendous amounts of extended durations of time during which they can do deep work without having their time fragmented by meetings. Another thing you can do is you can create office hours, just like a professor in a university. So let's say every Thursday from 12 to 3 are office hours for me. And anybody who needs anything ad hoc, questions, they're requesting a piece of information, or they just want to chat with me for a minute, which we now know is probably 25 minutes, they can contact me during those office hours. The office hours are designated as open time. Of course, there are times when nobody will show up. Well, if they don't show up, I haven't wasted time, because in between requests, I can be doing shallow work, responding to emails, pulling reports that don't require any real deep work, and so forth. So that's a very effective way to make yourself accessible, to create the opportunity for people to get what they need, again, without cannibalizing your durations of deep work. Another thing you should definitely be doing is look at every meeting that has been put on your calendar and make a decision based on the calculus of value about whether your attendance is relevant. Because if it's irrelevant, you should say no. You can say no nicely. You can say, I'm working on this other project. If anything consequential happens that I need to know, please send me an email summary after the meeting. Now you're clued in to what you need to know, but you've bought back your time to do your own deep work, to provide the value that your job requires you to provide. Finally, I think each and every one of us should be doing a triage of all of our meetings, a deep cleanse, like when you go through your closet and you pull out every item that you haven't worn for 3 or 4 years, you might never fit into it again, and it's not even in style, and you give those away to charity. This is the same thing. You want to go through your meetings one by one and ask the question, is this meeting important? Does it create enough value to justify the opportunity cost of what I could be doing in that time? That is the scale you want to weigh to make decisions about which meetings to say yes to and which meetings to say no to. And basically, I am in favor of saying no to way more meetings. Say no. If you need to know something from the meeting, let somebody send you a recording, send you a summary, show you the notes from the meeting. If any of that is in place, then the odds are you don't need to attend. Do a deep cleansing. Take out every meeting, consolidate your meetings, set days for no meetings. A lot of my client companies do this. They just designate Wednesday and Thursdays are no meeting days, or Tuesdays and Thursdays are no meeting days. Unless a client or a customer needs something, we have no internal meetings. And those days then are dedicated to people doing real deep work, getting into flow, and producing the value for which they have actually been hired. That is the way that you ensure that you can produce the value you need to produce without your brain and your time being fragmented. I hope this has been helpful. My name is Amie Devero. I will be doing a Q&A, and I'll also be moderating another session. And I'll be in the conference hall on and off throughout the summit. So I would love to meet with some of you, have conversations. I want to hear your feedback. There are also some other things that I offer. I have a community called the Beyond Better community, which is for leaders and people thinking about critical thinking, strategy, decision-making, and you can request to join by going to www.beyondbetter.online. I also have a newsletter at beyondbetter.io, and I have some super cool shirts that I'd love you to look at. They are really awesome, and they're only newly available, which is why I'm so unreasonably excited about them. So that is pretty much the whole story I have for you. And if you want to buy back your time for your deep work, please undertake some of these steps. And of course, I would love to hear your feedback and answer your questions about how to execute this in your organization or your work. Thanks.